Hi, my name's Brooke Booth. I'm a life coach and I help people who are in a mixed faith marriage. And what I mean by this is I help LDS people or post LDS people, who they've gone through a faith transition, one spouse or the other, or maybe just started out that way. And now they're dealing with the impacts in their relationship from not being on the same page when it comes to religious beliefs. And to a certain extent, all relationships are really a mixed faith marriage of some sort. No two people are always on in the exact same place on that faith spectrum. But a lot of times the people who come to me, they've drifted apart. And now they're finding themselves not as close as they once were in their religious beliefs and in their faith and in how they see the LDS church. And you're watching this probably because that's where you find yourself. You find yourself there in this new version of a mixed faith marriage for you. And it can come because of your faith transition or maybe your spouse. Whether you're owner, whether you're not, you still have to deal with it, right? So if you're anything like me, you probably don't want to be in a mixed faith marriage. I certainly didn't. You prefer that you just didn't have your faith transition, or that your spouse could at least have one too, right? Have the grace to join you on this journey. Or if they are having it, that they could stop having it, right? But here we are. Here we are. And you don't know how to make this work maybe, or even if it's possible that it can work. Maybe you're just scared. You're worried, you're still unpacking your own faith transition, or your spouse is still unpacking their faith transition, and you haven't even begun to understand how now to deal with the marriage issues that come because of it. Maybe you're wondering how to handle church, extended family, calling, coffee, friends, right? Kids, Sundays, there are just so many things. Maybe it feels overwhelming or impossible to disentangle religion from relationship. Maybe it feels like you're just walking on eggshells all the time now in your relationship and you hate it, right? Maybe it feels like you need to figure out this new normal or you're just going to be miserable forever, like sink or swim. And that's what this video is about. I'm here to help you learn how to swim in your mixed faith marriage, or at least doggy paddle a little, because there are ways to improve it. So let me tell you my story a little. So, been married to my husband, I think we're going to be 18 years this year. When we'd been married about 3 years, 3 years ago, about 15 years, I started to go through my faith transition. It was probably before about that, but that's really when it became more pronounced and significant, where I started to think I wanted to distance and create some space physically and not just mentally and emotionally. So the whole process probably really peaked around 2017, 2018. And I decided that I needed to have some space, step away, as I called it, and to just not attend like I had, which has been very active, very regular. Between my husband and I up to this point, we pretty much held every calling available in our ward and stake. I'm very active, very involved, very much that quintessential LDS family. I had served a mission. I had attended BYU. We were married in the temple. We were the package deal when it comes to what a Mormon family looks like. My husband had served as bishop. We ticked all the boxes. And when my faith transition came, I felt like I was, doing things slowly, deliberately, thoughtfully. I felt like I was giving warning to my husband about my changing beliefs. I wasn't giving him a lot, but I felt like I was at least giving him a heads up and keeping him somewhat in the loop, right? But if you were to talk to my husband, he would say it felt like I dumped this on him pretty quickly. All of a sudden, boom, and I was out. And, I remember being on a walk in our local nature preserve, and I was telling him that I was considering not attending actively on Sundays anymore. And it was intense. I mean, he was really devastated, even very disappointed, very hurt. And even when we go on walks there now, I can feel those feelings of discomfort and disappointment. It's not an easy thing. It was really, frankly, traumatic for both of us. And for a long time, we were floundering. We were just not doing a particularly good job of dealing with our mixed faith marriage. And, for a long time, I felt like I couldn't discuss it with him. I couldn't really tell him what I was thinking and feeling. He wasn't receptive. I could tell he was really uncomfortable talking about it. I felt unsupported. I felt unacceptable. He felt, like I was rushing into this decision, that I was breaking promises, sacred promises. He felt terribly betrayed. We were both completely justified, or so we felt, right? Completely justified in what was going on. But over time, we started to figure things out. We started to practice tools and get help, reach out. And we started to, we made a lot of mistakes, lots. And then we also learned a lot of really fantastic things. And this video is where I'm going to share with you 3 of the biggest, and I want to say the most common mistakes that I think happen in a mixed faith marriage, and 3 fantastic solutions to help you work through them. This comes from our own experience, but it also comes from the clients I work with in my coaching practice as I help people who are in a mixed faith marriage, transitioning LDS, or people whose spouses are transitioning. So 3 common mistakes followed by 3 common solutions. Because over time, we were able to work through it. We were able to come out on the other side. And now I feel like our marriage is better than it's ever been. So I want to share these with you. Okay, 3 common mistakes. First one, blame. Blame others, blame ourselves. This one's common, right? So usually this kind of sounds like it's their fault. So it may be like, if they could just, so if I was the non-believing spouse, I may be telling myself, and I know these terms are a little reductive, but just for the purposes of this video, I'll say non-believing and I'll say believing. And I know that's not always the case. And there is a lot of belief that non-believers carry. It's not a great term, but just for the simplistic purposes of this video, I'll be using those terms. So the non-believing spouse may be thinking, if they could just understand me, this wouldn't be so hard. If they would just listen to my point of view, if they would just read this article or listen to this podcast, I would feel better. This wouldn't be so hard. They would understand, right? And all of these are just creating blame. So the believing spouse may say, if they would just fast and pray, if they would just believe, if they would just talk to the bishop or stake president. And what's going on here, ultimately, the essence of this is, if they would just fill in the blank, I would feel better. If they would just fill in the blank, this wouldn't be so hard. It's in essence saying, this is their fault, right? If they would change, this would be better. And so we do this too with ourselves. We blame ourselves. So the non-believing spouse may say, I should have figured this out years ago. I should have known better. Why did this take me so long? The believing spouse may say, I could have prevented this. Maybe I should have prayed more, fasted more. I should have tried harder, shared my testimony more. Should have gone to the temple more. It may sound something like this. And then I could have prevented this. Ultimately meaning, and then we wouldn't have to deal with this. We could feel better. And again, it's that same thing. If I had just, then this wouldn't be so hard. Then this wouldn't be happening. Then we'd feel better. So this is the blame. We blame others. We blame ourselves. It's basically we're assigning fault. And the human brain does this. The brain tries to find meaning for what's going on. And one way it does that is assigning fault. And I tell you this so you can be aware. And be aware of the patterns. Be aware of what you're thinking. Are these the thoughts you're thinking? These types of thoughts, like if they would just, then that's definitely a sign that blame is cropping up. And when we let blame in the driver's seat, in the driver's seat of our marriage, the driver's seat of our faith transition, or of our mixed faith marriage, that's not pretty. Like, it's just not pretty. It leads to disempowerment. It leads to victimhood. I mean, it basically takes away our responsibility in what's happening and how we're responding. It just takes that all away. So if we're not responsible, if we don't even have a choice, then we feel stuck, right? And it just feels terrible, frankly. What it often leads to, things lashing out, resentment, anger, passive-aggressive behavior, these are all very typical when blame is what's happening. So the second common mistake that I see in mixed faith marriages is fear. And fear comes up, it happens when we think thoughts like, this is a serious problem. I don't know how to handle this. This is not what I signed up for. This will hurt the kids. This will hurt our family. This is not good. These types of thoughts really generate fear. And I see it showing up two different ways. We'll talk about how it can show up with the non-believing spouse and how it can show up with the believing spouse. So with the non-believing spouse, sometimes there's a lot of fear over how the reaction to their faith transition, to the change in their beliefs. There's a lot of fear around that typically. They may not want to share with their spouse all of their thoughts and all of their feelings because there's so much fear around rejection, or how things will change, or how things will, not be the same anymore. They're just afraid of what that response is going to be. And so they just don't share. And you saw this in the story I shared earlier, is my husband really felt like I wasn't, he just what? Where did this come from? It's because I was so afraid of telling him what I was thinking while I was going through it, because it just seemed like it would just lead to rejection, right? Very common. But also you can see when I was showing up like that in fear, and I wasn't even though I was telling him, I was giving him a heads up, I wasn't telling him a lot of details, and I wasn't going deep because I was so afraid of what he would think about me, what he would feel about me, all these things that I can't control anyway, and I was trying to control them by not telling him. It caused us, to have to work through more issues that could have been avoided. And that's why I want to bring up fear. So for the believing spouse, fear can look a little different. So for my husband, it looked quite different. He was very much, afraid of how this was going to impact the family, his eternal family. It's a big deal. And he told this story a couple of years later when we were having dinner with some friends who had gone through a similar experience, and we were kind of swapping war stories, right? He's telling them that he wasn't able to show up as he would have liked, as the husband he would have liked to have been for me, because he was just so afraid. He was just in that fear loop, that hurt spiral, and fear had just taken over. He wasn't able to show up in a way he wanted for me, who was at that time also really struggling and trying to figure things out. So you can see when fear comes in and really takes us over, and we just get in that loop where we're just looping fear all the time, it just prevents us from showing up in a way that probably we would like to show up. It prevents us from really being who we want to be in that relationship. Okay, third common mistake, disconnection. And this really happens a lot from fear. When we show up, we let fear take over and then we show up in those ways. A lot of times disconnection is the result. And I want to talk about this. So a lot of times when we're feeling fear, we're feeling hurt, we get in what I call, and I mentioned earlier, we get into this hurt spiral. And it just keeps going and going and going, and it leads to disconnection. So let me talk you through how this might look. So for the non-believing spouse, he or she, she will say she may be thinking, he wanted a Mormon wife, not me. He only married me because I was a good Mormon girl, and I'm not a good Mormon girl anymore, right? And, he didn't marry me for who I am. He married me for the role I would fulfill. All of these things, basically, you're telling yourself, I'm not acceptable. I'm not who he wants. And then you feel, fear, you feel rejection. And then you show up in a way, maybe passive aggressive, maybe you withdraw, right? Maybe you're not telling him exactly what you're thinking and feeling because you're afraid of more rejection. All of these things happen, and it just creates big piles of disconnection, big piles of it, right? And we just do it over and over. So we start withdrawing because we're afraid of rejection, and then we tell ourselves, he doesn't want to be married to me. He wants to be married to somebody else. This isn't what he wanted. This isn't what he signed up for. And then we create more fear, and then we start withdrawing more and talking less and sharing less, and then that creates more and more and more disconnection. Now I'm guessing the reason you got married and the reason you want to be in a relationship is for the connection. Connection feels fantastic. And a lot of times what we do when we get stuck in this blame and this fear and this hurt is we just start creating disconnection without even realizing it. Wanting connection, but what we're really doing and how we're feeling and what we're thinking and all the actions we're taking are just creating piles and piles of disconnection. So it happens as well with believing spouses. Let me give you, a few examples. So they may think, they lied, they betrayed me, they ruined the family, they ruined our eternal family. And then this causes so much fear. And then you may act out, there's nothing for me to do here because it's ruined, right? So you may not be reaching out, or you may be so in your hurt that you're not able to show up and support or listen. Or a lot of times we're not able to listen because we're just so afraid of what that will mean, what's being said. So a lot of times when we're afraid to communicate, the other spouse is also afraid to listen and hear what's going on. And then that just creates the disconnection and more disconnection. We're disconnected in our communication, and it just compounds. It just compounds. Okay, so those are the three problems. Blame, we have fear, and we have disconnections. And you can see they're kind of woven together. But it's important and helpful to see them so you can recognize them when they're happening in you and happening in your marriage. Sometimes these things, they're just there and we don't even recognize what's going on. So it's helpful to talk through them and to see what they are so you can start to see them in your relationship and see the patterns and become aware and see if maybe you want to do something different.